So here we go with reading Mark Lanegan's audiobook with Gwyneth Paltrow or whatever being the voice.
Apples from a tree. I had been feeling weak and sick for a few days and then woke up one morning completely deaf. My equilibrium shaky, and my mind in a surreal psychedelic dream state. I lost my footing at the top of the stairs. Head over heels overhead, I knocked myself out on the windowsill as I crashed down the narrow staircase at my house. Bang. My wife was out horseback riding for the day, and I came to hours later, still unable to hear a thing, unable to move, two huge open welts on my head, and my knee not supporting any weight. For 2 days, I tried to get from stairwell to couch, with no success. I could not move, nor could my wife support my 200-pound body, so I lay suffering on some blankets on the hard floor for 48 hours. My ribs were cracked, my spine bruised, battered, and sore, and my already chronically messed up knee gone again, as if some tendons were ripped or a ligament severed. My leg was useless. Every attempted breath was a battle, no matter how hard I tried to take a natural one. Though I refused to go to hospital, my wife finally called an ambulance behind my back and I was wheeled out of my yard on a gurney. I eventually ended up in intensive care, unable to draw oxygen, and was diagnosed with some exotic new strain of the coronavirus, for which there was no cure, of course. I was put into a medically induced coma, none of which I remembered. 6 weeks later, and still in the ICU, 3:30 a.m., wide-ass awake now, raw as fuck, still fighting for air. Wiped out from severe insomnia and the twin kicks to the nuts that were the virus and my injuries, I started wishing I were still in my medical blackout. It was beyond evident that as much as I craved some temporary oblivion, the woefully inadequate amounts of Seroquel, Xanax, and Oxycontin.
The second is change this voice to a dude's voice, if I can. How do I do that? Well, I guess we're stuck with Gwyneth Paltrow or whatever her name is.
I was being given were not going to put me down for more than a few minutes at a time, probably since I'd been self-administering elephant-sized doses of the same shit on and off for years. I was a specialist at finding the doctors that would willingly write scripts for nearly anything I wanted, working psychiatric clinics, urgent care facilities, and your average general practitioners and dentists. In California, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting a medical facility. At the same time, I cultivated a large circle of shady Craigslist amateur pharmacists who filled in the days between my legal doses with bottles of black market pills. To me, it was second nature to eat tablets like candy, and I'd been doing it so long I'd forgotten what they actually felt like, unless I was caught without for a time and then started again. And of course, it never occurred to me that there might come a time when I would legitimately need some. The myopia that largely dogged me my entire life kept me rooted in the here and now, and hardly anything else ever crossed my mind, especially if it was to take place in some far-off, distant future never land. Such places did not exist in my limited scope of reality. The older dude, Dennis, one of my 3 roommates, groaned and rolled around, tugging uncomfortably on his fourth. Nobody was happy here, I could tell you that much. I was intubated, a breathing tube down my throat, for the first full 3 weeks after being dumped at the hospital by the ambulance workers that had rolled my damaged body on a stretcher through my front garden. They had put me in the back of the vehicle where I wheezed and fought to take a proper breath of air to no avail. Now, a month later, having been visited by nothing but bizarre dreams, strange visions, shadowy darkness, untrustworthy memories, and recurring hallucinations, all hallmarks of near-death experiences, I was conscious again. Still in intensive care, catheter shoved up my dick, every attempt at taking a deep breath, even a yawn, met with the unwelcome sensation of being slammed in the chest with a 20-pound sledgehammer. Apparently my light had almost gone out permanently more than once, according to the doctors and nurses. I was asked 3 times a day if I knew where I was and rarely gave a correct answer. Sometimes I felt as though I were pulling steel high up on the skeleton of a stage, taking down one long, round metal ceiling pole while standing on an identical one 20 feet off the ground. Or I'd be driving miles to deliver drugs to someone in another city, or dismantling a stolen car after midnight for parts to sell or trade. Sometimes I'd be boxing potatoes and stacking them on pallets in the Spud factory, or using metal hooks to buck hay bales onto a tractor under the intense eastern Washington summer sun, or I'd be drunkenly cooking pancake and egg breakfasts in a busy restaurant after drinking and carousing all night, a few of the activities among many I had participated in my youth. At times I felt I were on a tour bus in the States or the UK, and I remember thinking I was on a train traveling through Australia for a while. China, the Middle East, the plains of Canada, and where I had grown up in the Pacific Northwest were all places I imagined I was holding court amongst the damned. I had no idea where these delusions came from, but they were ever present. I was slightly aware as I came to that I was hooked up to medical equipment, but it felt as though the rooms where I lay were always radically different, always changing. A house, a backstage somewhere, etc. And while the rooms were forever different, the view out the window was always the same. In reality, I was in hospital 20 minutes from my home in County Kerry, Ireland, and I didn't realize the view in my dream was the sight out of the window in the hospital room. One night, I dreamt I was living in a large, windowless basement apartment off a rain-wet main drag in Seattle, with several of my ex-girlfriends and ex-wives, many of whom detested me in real life, all in harmony with each other, and I felt a peace come over me. Another night I dreamt I was back at my former home in California, a place I always swore I'd never leave, magically flying above the fruit trees with my beloved little dog in my arms, pulling fragrant apples off the treetops and feeding them to him as he licked my face just as he had the day he died and broke my heart. I woke up from that one crying, with my shirt soaked in tears of despair. On the bridge. Stood on the bridge, stammering, stuttering, shivering, teeth jackhammering, wind chill barbiturates. Sorrow and grief despair will kick your door in and rip your fucking heart out. It would be so easy to let go of this reality if there were another one somewhere in sight, a stronger one, corrosive like battery acid, something to burn this dream right out of my head. Fuck all, hillbilly Nostradamus. After almost 2 months, it seemed like I had been in hospital forever. With no discernible light in the tunnel, patience level below zero, I was at a crossroad where I would have gladly stepped in front of a train just to change the outcome of the day, every dark hour slowly running into the next. I had suffered through so many self-imposed hard times in the past, but this was beyond the pale, with people all over the world being hospitalized and dying on a daily basis. And since there appeared to be sweet fuck all anyone could do for you, what was the actual point in going through this medical reach-around? You either caught it or didn't, got sick or stayed well, slowly survived it, or were laid low and died. And my personal experience so far seemed to bear out this hypothesis. Now that I was back in the world and knew the score, it felt as if my days consisted only of the occasional blood pressure check, a plate of food I never ate, and extreme boredom, pain, and unhappiness. My fellow patients were all much older than me, and many whimpered and sobbed constantly. The happier ones loved to talk nonstop. I wore a pair of headphones round the clock so as not to be drawn into conversation. As I started to slowly regain my shattered wits, the deal I'd made with a nighttime doctor for extra pharmaceuticals was predictably fucked, and I neither received the meds I'd been promised, nor was I given the freedom to have a smoke at the window before lights out. Everything felt like something that was happening again, an unwelcome déjà vu, with the end result preordained. The hillbilly Nostradamus in me had often been mythically correct as to a handful of likely outcomes in any given situation, but what my self-destructive mind was telling me here was nothing I wanted to entertain. Still, I found it impossible to keep these unwanted thoughts from invading my head 50 times a day. I was so angry at being deprived of the cigarette I'd been promised, I stopped interacting with staff for a good week or so. This was unnecessary torture. My arms were covered in nicotine patches since a smoke was not going to happen. If I were mercifully able to drift off for 15 minutes, my mind would always replay the same vision, in which I was walking alone on the wintertime roadside, scanning the parcels of fields behind ancient rock walls, under black skies, looking for relief that didn't exist. I knew friends and associates from the past would likely assume this latest spectacular deep dive were drug-related, but I was a million miles away from giving a damn about that. Couldn't give a fuck what anybody thought. Nobody had ever honestly believed I was clean the 15 years I was, anyway. My father, a heavy drinker well into his 70s, had called me at 4 o'clock one afternoon from his home in Alaska, drunk, while I was washing my clothes at a laundromat in Pasadena. He began to accuse me of being on drugs, which at 5 years clean pissed me off. I called him the next day when I knew he'd be sober and politely asked that he not phone me while he was drinking. He didn't call me again for nearly 20 years. From the moment I was brought out of my chemically induced sleep and was told what had happened and where I had been, I was determined to survive this nightmare. even though I had very little say, actually, no say in the matter, and had zero ammo to fight with. And I was totally and fully debilitated. More and more, this was reminiscent of an unending stretch in county jail that I couldn't shake, with my trial date being intentionally undetermined, constantly moved around just to keep me inside. It felt like the longer I was kept here, the worse I got, not the other way around. After all, I was less than minutes from my place. But my leg, back, lungs, and psyche were still so twisted up I could hardly even get around with a walker. I found the situation to be intolerably fucked. Time dragged insidiously on. I had been brought in on St. Patty's Day, and now it was May 9th. 3 months. This was fucking ludicrous. I tried my best to suppress, sneezing or coughing, because every time I did, my entire upper body was racked with sharp spasms of pain and severe disease.
Hey, in Bloomer, yeah. Joe said he was in the basement and a scuffle, an argument and yelling, and then a scuffle is what happened. And Joe said, what the fuck, like yelling it. And then Kurt said that, this is what Joe said, he said everything was, Kurt said that everything was fine, it's okay. And then I guess Joe went to go upstairs or something happened, and he looked back and he seen what happened to Kurt, getting hit over the head with something. But, I don't know. Some people, when they talk about a situation, sometimes it's, I don't know. But that's what he said. If, those are his words. That was when I was on a video call with him and Chris Todd. Okay, here we go.
Whatever was in this shit wagon I'd caught a ride on, it was no fucking joke. I'd taken my share of well-deserved ass-kickings over the years, but this thing was trying to dismantle me, body and mind, and I could see no end to it in sight. 5:30 a.m., lights flashing on and off, nurses already laughing and starting to work across the hallway. I couldn't have slept 5 minutes if I wanted to, and I wanted to very fucking much, thank you. I had to get out of here. That was paramount. One of the charming side effects of the COVID was the loss of smell and taste, rendering everything I tried to eat seem like it had been cooked up in a cat box. The more the doctors kept stressing the importance of eating and endlessly pushing the food on me, the less likely I was to put any of it in my mouth. And after another tortuous attempted blood-taking session, I flat out refused to be a human pincushion anymore, causing a standoff I wasn't going to lose as long as I were conscious. My kidneys reportedly were blown out, and while I was in the coma, I had been on dialysis, with the doctors daily predicting doom and gloom, prepping my wife and immediate circle of friends for my imminent undoing, lifetime dialysis or transplant. They told my wife I held the record for the longest stay in this condition to survive at this institution. The nurses were a saving grace, very kind and caring, and I was amazed at their warmth towards all the patients, even the openly unhappy and borderline unfriendly ones such as myself. I became pals with a man named Francie who worked as a porter at the hospital, and he was there every day offering support, bringing chocolate and sausage rolls, the only things I could stomach besides milk. I knew where my remaining veins were hiding and could have accessed them if allowed, but the last thing a doctor wants is for a patient to do something they can't. They tried to make a deal with me. Let them try to extract from an artery once or try 5 times to find a conventional vein. I immediately vetoed this plan. I'd be goddamned before I let an actual doctor or anyone else stick me in an artery, a painful mess of an affair. I had accidentally shot heroin into one before, and the memory of that wretched experience I had never forgotten. And 5 more tries at hitting a normal vein was not going to work for me either. I asked them to please hit my jugular and be done with it, but the young physician expressed trepidation at that, never having taken blood from someone's neck before. Love story, predestination concepts, self-fulfilling prophecy, self-fulfilling prophecies, and all that. Yesterday and tomorrow. In the back of my mind, I had always known those remaining veins were going to prove valuable at some point. For 15 years, I avoided giving blood for 2 reasons. First, I jealously guarded what was left in case of an emergency, in case I came to a place someday with my back against a wall, where only a shot of something strong was going to get me through. And second, to find a vein in the first place was just so fucking unpleasant. I hadn't used an outfit in years, but if I were to be diagnosed with some terminal illness, you could bet the farm I would then. Due to my past addiction, for years my life had been an endless search for a place to bury a needle.
But yeah, in Bloomer, hey, Bob Zombie, I do remember correctly. Joe said that, so the scuffle and yelling and argument happened, and Joe yelled, "What the fuck?" Twice or whatever. It was twice. He said it twice. And then Kurt said that everything was fine, everything's okay. And then things got a lot worse.
Everything else I ever cared about, I maniacally burned through them all like there was no tomorrow until suddenly it was tomorrow, with me standing dick in hand thinking it was still yesterday. Torch song. 5,000 miles harvested in Bone Orchard, Dia de los Muertos agony, death letter. Repeat sodium glare and panic room sex Bible of salt mine escapee. Here come the jingle jangle patchwork man sewn up to put a bullet through a paper donkey. Rise and shine. I woke up to the smell of shit as a porter cleaned the excrement off the ass and back of the patient in the next bed over. Not the most pleasant way to wake up, but good morning. I'd stopped eating altogether, and ironically, milk was the only thing I could get down. Milk, something I had found, disgusting my entire life, and now it was my lifeblood. Every day, a cadre of doctors and nurses tried to convince me to let them draw blood, which of course I wasn't going to do unless I was the one drawing. As they tried to cajole me, I stonewalled and looked through them with the dead eyes of a shark until they gave up and left me alone. Luckily, Francie was always around, and they also let my wife come and go as she wished, so I had 2 important allies. Every day, my wife, Shelley, showed up with a list of friends and family who were sending their love. On the one hand, it was nice to hear, but on the other, it depressed me, having everyone knowing my business. If I wanted you to know, I'd have told you myself, right? Rumor and innuendo, shit-talking, and gossip are for the motherfucking birds, even though I've been guilty of such on rare occasion. Keep my business under wire hat, please, and let me keep my own shit to myself. Wounded, death report. A nurse told me they were going to move me into his room, a very large one. He said the change in scenery would do me good, so I went for it. That was a mistake. In my previous room, I was at least 15 years younger than anybody else, but this new room was basically filled with living corpses in their 80s and 90s. Great change of scenery. My first morning there, I opened my eyes to find an old lady rummaging through my things and taking my chocolate, eating some as she went about her thievery. I suppose when you got so close to the end, everything was in play, as she obviously didn't give a damn. So I reached past her into my stash and gave her all the chocolate I had. I would turn my phone on once daily just to see how many COVID deaths had taken place worldwide the previous day. My resolve was starting to fade and my dreams started to become more sinister. I dreamt my mother emptied a cardboard box full of large wolf spiders on me, and as I frantically brushed them off my face, she stood laughing and said, "This is what you have coming, you selfish prick." Being on the receiving end of her continual curses was old hat, but it made me angry as hell that I couldn't even die without being insulted by her. Meanwhile, I was losing weight at an incredible speed. I was at least 25 pounds lighter now than when I had arrived. 2 doctors sat down to tell me how dangerously close to the edge I was and how I'd better start eating and let them take blood to check the state of my kidneys. I agreed to give them a urine sample instead, and when they found blood and proteins in it indicating kidney damage, I honestly did not give a shit, because at this point, I would just as soon let the chips fall where they might, rather than endure any more of what felt like a steady regime of mind-bending torture and ridiculous ennui. A nighttime nurse caught me taking a drag off a smoke at 4 a.m. and raised so much hell that had I 2 healthy legs, I'd have been inclined to try and beat him down, but I couldn't have hurt a child the state I was in. "I'm reporting you to the doctor," he said. "Go ahead, you son of a bitch," was my response. Other than the odd occurrence such as that, I mainly didn't say a word all day. After all, I had not asked anyone to bring me here, nor had anyone asked if I wanted to be there. It tasted like a jail cocktail with a viral chaser. As far as I could tell, nothing was really being done to heal me. It was all so much bullshit, and the daily death reports convinced me that this was just a waiting room at the morgue, that at some time in the near future my number was going to come up, and I would be another casualty in this sterile and uninviting place. I began to have fantasies in which I walked to the center of a huge field surrounded by forest, with trees a mile high, emptied several cans of petrol everywhere, threw a lit Zippo into the grass, and then stood in the middle of it waiting to be immolated. And I was so very tired. Constant daydreams of leaving pervasive, I couldn't shake this shadow hanging over my head, nor could I shut it off, even on the rare occasions I slept. One night I wheeled my walker to the window and spent a very long time contemplating whether or not a fall from 4 stories would do the job of finishing me. All of my godlike delusions disappeared. My thoughts were consumed by the memories of nonstop intentional and unintentional damage I had caused my entire life, and the darkness I had willingly invited in. I'd lived like a fire raging through a skyscraper, a cauldron of negative energy, when I would think about the multitude of dead and broken romances, lies, dishonest promises, and false hopes of past situations and relationships. My ruthlessness, thieving and using, missed opportunities, and heartache would nearly make me choke back tears. And I might have cried had self-pity been in my playbook, but I was acutely aware that I'd asked for this and had it coming, like every other painful event in my life. I held the real stains brought on from this sickness inside. They were the wounds no one but myself was ever going to see, not even my long-suffering wife, Shelley, who had largely stuck with me through years of my destructive behavior, deception, barely contained violent impulses, and bullshit promises to change for the better. She had tested positive for COVID when I'd been hospitalized, but never developed any symptoms. After years of being correctly identified as the deviant bad actor I was, I'd finally happened upon one who believed against her better judgment that I was a misunderstood poet with something worthwhile to give the world. But that book had been closed forever long ago, and all salvation was so far away it was out of sight. I had stumbled through the darkness for so long that daylight was blinding. And when I was left to my own devices, I would generally go on a self-destructive tear. Shelley showed up on more than one occasion just in time to bring me back from the edge, saving me at the expense of her own well-being, sending her into the deep blues herself. This brought on a temporary guilt, but I was constitutionally incapable of really thinking about anyone but myself, and would start scheming my next self-serving move before I could think too much about any pain I'd wrought. This was my payback, plain and simple. Miss me. Do you think that you might miss me? Slowly goes the night, afraid that you might miss me, afraid that you could love and lose, so slowly turns the clock. I dreamt of the rising tide. In late April 2021, I made up my mind to leave the hospital. The constant noise, lights, and sleeplessness were doing a number on my head, and I could feel I was on the edge of an explosion. A time bomb out of time, drowning in the misery of my fellow patients, and as someone who preferred his own company, I found this scene excruciating. When the porter brought breakfast around, I declined as usual, told her I wanted to leave that day, and asked that she help facilitate that. 4 hours later, a doctor came by and began trying to talk me into staying, a conversation which lasted 3 hours. You are still very ill, and the hospital is the safest place for you. Until when? I asked. You have a very long road ahead of you to recovery. Besides having COVID, you have multiple other injuries that are not going to heal overnight. I can't give you a specific date, but it's going to take quite a while. This was extremely unwelcome news. As usual, I had obviously misjudged the severity of the situation. I decided to give it a little more time until I had formed a more solid plan. That night, I had an extremely vivid dream. I was on a beach at dusk, standing at the water's edge when the tide started coming in with a vengeance, and I watched as a boat approaching the shore suddenly caught fire and sank before my eyes. As I turned around to leave, I could see that between myself and the woods behind were what looked like thousands of snakes coiled together, blocking my path. Every time I wanted out, something was in my way, trapped. I found an old rusty metal trap out by the old canal near my childhood home. I cleaned it up and set it back in the muddy banks, hoping to catch a muskrat just for the rotten fuck of it on my way home through the fields. I came across a cow stuck in the mud, a huge animal in distress. I tried for hours to push it free, but I was just a boy, not a trapper. Exhausted and nearing nightfall, I walked back to the canal, set off the trap with a stick, and threw it in the water. Months later, I trudged back that same way and found the intact skeleton of the cow I tried to set free. This might sting a little. My great-great-great-grandfather Thomas Lanegan was born in 1794 in Kilkenny, Ireland, and at age 30 migrated to Nova Scotia. From there, my family spread out across North America, mainly the Canadian Maritimes. Some ended up on Prince Edward Island, some in New Brunswick, my great-grandmother landing there from the Scottish Highlands. My great-grandfather Alexander came down from Canada to Wisconsin, where his wife gave birth to a son, my grandfather William. William settled in South Dakota and fought for the United States in the trenches of France in World War I, surviving and making a home out west in Washington State, where he worked in the shipyards during World War II and had my father when he was an older man. My maternal grandmother was born in Wales to Welsh parents, and my maternal grandfather, who was shot to death on his front lawn before I was born, I knew nothing about. Being largely estranged from that side of my family, I had never received any more information than that. All I knew is that the seemingly brash intensity of my ancestors' behavior made it nearly a miracle that I had come out of that fucked up fray. Hospitals and institutions, those were two places I knew intimately, though. When I was barely out of my teens, I already had so many long hospital stays that my impatience level went through the roof if I ever ended up in one. Jails, rehabs, and psych wards were also familiar places to be avoided in my book. When I was 12, my own mother tried to 5,150 me, but my father stepped in knowing she just wanted to see me gone, punished and locked up out of her sight no matter the cost. On one occasion, around that same time, I was standing at the window of my basement bedroom listening to music when my mother burst into the room. Dragging the stylus across my record and breaking the record in half, she yelled at me maniacally, then turned around and slammed my door on her way out. I had a buck knife in my hand, and as soon as she left, I threw it against the door, where it stuck in the wood. Seconds later, she was back, saw the knife in the door, and went hysterical, screaming that I had tried to kill her. This incident set off a war between my father and her, and when she refused to get a grip on herself, he held her against the wall and ripped the phone cord out of the wall to prevent her from calling the police to report me for attempted murder. Nearly every dispute, drama, or argument in our unhappy household placed me squarely in the middle of it. These were weekly occurrences at least, often daily. Straight out of the box, I learned to avoid her at all costs if possible, and I left my childhood behind very early on without a single happy memory of myself and her. Her bitter dislike of me was so obvious I would often be doing nothing at all and come under attack anyway. The one and only time I made her authentically laugh was when her own mother were staying with us, and I yelled "fuck you" at her when she tried to tell me I couldn't leave the house. I took direction from my father, the only voice of reason in our home, although he was often absent, living a second life elsewhere to escape the savage war constantly fought at our house. My place in our family tree was the lowest hanging, most easily pounded piñata, the anti-protagonist, always living under the threat of taking a mental or physical beatdown from this sick person and always fighting back with feral intensity. I didn't know why I was the constant target, but neither did I ever care. Protecting myself was my main concern, and every dread-filled moment I was alone in her presence set me on high alert. She tried so many times and so many ways to destroy me, I would have murdered her if I ever had the opportunity. After
All right, Mel.
searching my room and finding a weed pipe, she gave an ultimatum. Either I see a psychologist or she would turn me into the police. Her favorite ultimate go-to threat, one she had made good on before. Of course, I chose the psych doctor, who after talking with me for 10 minutes said, "I think it's your mother who needs help, not you." Had it not been for my father, things could have gone very dark on me, and when they finally divorced, I was happier than I'd ever been. My long rap sheet of juvenile crimes, however, landed my ass in serious trouble as soon as I turned 18, and had it not been for the fact that nearly every charge and arrest was drug and alcohol related, my life could have been even darker. My mother quit her job as a college lecturer on early childhood education and went to work at the Hanford nuclear plant, and when the FBI visited my father's house to question him about his take on her mental health, I held back my laughter at his honest and humorous answers to the questions. It was obvious he was having fun. Not one to stab anyone in the back, he brought smiles from the government agents with his brief answers that screamed, "Watch out, buyer beware." My first stepfather was a hell-raising biker covered in homemade tattoos. We would go hunting together for rabbits to eat, but he would also sometimes attach a scope to his rifle and blow away birds for sport at such a distance there was no retrieving their bodies. He was that kind of guy. My second stepfather was a sick right-wing fanatic in his 90s who watched Fox News round the clock and gave my nephew some right-wing literature for his 15th birthday. He was that kind of guy. The only man in my life I ever truly respected was my own father, who sadly had not the best luck in the marriage game himself. Father and son. I carried an axe into the woods twice a day in summertime with my father to split the logs he would cut with his chainsaw, a massacre of trees. He could be a strict taskmaster, and we went about our work with me in sullen, angry silence. That was the only time we were in conflict, because at heart he shunned conflict. He just wanted to get by quietly, had enough of war. But on those occasions he wanted his son to work. A war began because his son was at heart. Something different, half father, but part spider, too. Part snake and part hateful fiend, part wolf, caught in a trap, thirsty for blood and revenge and chaos and escape, digging graves and brooding discontent. As a boy, one of my many obsessions was getting to France somehow to join the Foreign Legion. Now I've been to France many times, in fact, but I never joined an army. Instead, I fought an imaginary...
I don't know. For some reason, who killed Kurt, Michelle is saying that he wasn't involved. Meanwhile, she speaks with Joe over the phone. I have Joe on audio recorded saying Mark Lanegan was there when the attack happened, and then about 30 minutes later, the gunshot. And Joe has even stated it to her over the telephone, so she could tell people that, yeah, it's true. I think it's a matter of, possibly losing thousands of subscribers, because most of their subscribers are the grunge fans, right? And Screaming Trees, well, they have a lot of fans of theirs. Even though they knew Mark was there and participated in the attack, they're putting money towards these whatever forensic stuff, but then they're discrediting Mark being there and saying Joe never said that and everything. Meanwhile, he is saying it. I have it recorded. He said it to Michelle over the phone. He said it in his book. I don't know why they're doing that, but they shouldn't be. But Isaac Cappy did talk about some YouTube channels that are really big and popular being infiltrated by nefarious individuals. So that could be going on. Maybe not. But what they're doing is not helping the case. They're just making money and spreading lies and looking good. And that shouldn't be happening. They know Mark Lanegan took part in the attack and murder on Kurt. Joe told Michelle specifically over the telephone that, even recently. He told me that. But the fact that Joe told her over the phone that Mark was there, did you read my book? And she said no. And he's like, well, read the book. She has the eyewitness telling her that Mark was there, took part in the attack and murder, and she's getting other people to believe that Mark Lanegan didn't take part in it. And basically going against the eyewitness. Why? I guess maybe that's what happens when you make friends with a lot of people on YouTube and friends of people that are famous, like Mark Lanegan's friends and everything. Suddenly you feel like you can't say this and you can't say that. Honestly, this is about Kurt Cobain, though. Yeah, it's not about Mark Lanegan. It's about Kurt Cobain, ultimately. And, well, it is about Mark, too, because he took part in the attack and the murder. I have that on audio. Michelle has spoken with Joe over the phone recently about it. So why is she discrediting him and saying Mark wasn't there? I don't know. Maybe it's something involving Courtney. Maybe it's just they want to keep their subscribers and still make a lot of money. Or maybe they just want to please people like Mark Lanegan's friends who they're now friends with. Either way, it's not good. All right, back to Mark's book.
For my entire life, and was the only casualty, dying over and over in countless ways, always by my own hand. If I were able to see my father again, I would tell him that I am just like him now, that I shun conflict and have had enough of war, and that I would be happy to go into the woods twice a day with him to split logs. 4 angels. Determined to get some quality sleep one night, I saved up my Seroquel and Xanax until I had a pretty good stash I was sure would put me down. I fell into a slumber quickly and found myself wandering in a bombed-out tenement. As I entered the first floor, a giant being with a helmet on and wings flat against his back turned and stared at me with the most magnetic blue eyes. "What are you doing here, boy?" he asked. "I'm trying to find a way out. I feel like I'm dying here." "You're not dying. You are just suffering. Hang on and you'll make it out. Don't worry." I heard a noise and turned around to see 2 more of these beings, and as they conversed, a very large 4th joined the room, this one obviously in charge. "Go back, kid," he said, and in a flash I was awake in my hospital bed, sure that something extraordinary had taken place, and I took some solace in the words of these creatures I assumed my subconscious had invented. GG. Clubfoot swinging monkey man free cock heavy and pernicious with my wings I have flown to meet you at the crest of the jungle gym and prevail. Into the blue, blue wildwood. As I lay awake all night, I stared out the window, seeing only shadows, cloudy images, and the outline of mutant faces, some with disturbing visages, disturbing smiles. The sounds in my head filled the hours and pounded my thoughts like a savage choir, never letting up. I wondered if I was going to get out of here alive, but it seemed increasingly unlikely. I couldn't walk. My voice was a scratchy whisper. I'd lost 25 pounds. In 6 weeks. And it didn't escape me that I'd only seen 2 patients released from intensive care the entire time I'd been conscious. I'd seen another one wheeled out, sheet over face, indicating death, which brought zero comfort or hope. Now I began to plot my exit. I assumed I was going to die anyway, but did not want it to be in this fucking hospital. If I could just get out, I would drag myself through town and out into the fields to wait for death.
Hey, Travis.
I struggled to put some clothes on. Every move I made completely exhausting me. I could barely put on a pair of socks. It brought on a fight for breath as though I'd run a marathon. My gasping for air woke up one of the other patients, who shot me an evil eye and then rolled over. Years earlier, I had woken up in a Swiss hotel room with a collapsed lung, and there had been no mistaking what it was. Now I could feel that same. Lung was working on maybe 30%, and I could barely do a thing for lack of oxygeneral. It was clear that I wasn't just going to dance out of here. The hopelessness and frustration, the utter futility of this now months-long scenario was far beyond anything I'd ever experienced, and I was fully despondent. How many times had I kicked a vicious, painful drug habit? What about the 6 months I'd been left alone in my house each day while my parents worked, lying on a bed in our living room in a full-body cast after I'd fallen from a bridge, an accident that left me with one leg slightly shorter than the other and a permanent limp? Or how about when my legs were crushed by a tractor while I was working in the pea fields and I'd spent a month on 4 blood thinners because of blood clots? Or when I had lain 10 days on a gurney in a Montreal hospital basement hallway on IV antibiotics to save my right arm?
Just a second. The way he said about his leg, one being shorter and the limp, doesn't that remind you of the person looking into Kurt's vehicle in front of Chris's house that Tom took a photo of and blurred the face of? Kind of looked like he was like walking up with a limp. One leg bigger and one smaller.
Swollen twice its normal size with a blood infection from a dirty needle. Or when a doctor had sewn up a gash in my knee only to have it become so infected with gangrene I came one day from having it amputated. What about the time I'd landed in a psych ward in Italy? Flat on my back in 4-point restraints, going into heavy withdrawals and nobody understanding my English. And all of those stiflingly boring days and nights in county jail seemed like a trip to the amusement park compared to this. I didn't care if I ever fucking sang again, as long as I could get out of here. Music was no longer my friend, but I left my headphones on round the clock just to keep the outside noise out of my head. How I wished I were. Still working my old job at Disneyland, or anywhere else in fact. Simple, mindless work, painting, patching, etc., and you were never on stage with anyone paying attention to you. Finally, I had formed an alliance with a nighttime doc who was generous with the sleep and pain meds, and he gave me enough to put me to sleep, at least 4 hours a night. I closed my eyes and found myself wandering in some woods. In the dark, the foliage and sky were deep blue. Exhausted, I lay down on a bed of blue moss and slept like death, hoping I would never wake up again. Sick as a dog. Supremely dissatisfied in physical and psychological pain. How much of my life has been wasted in this condition? A large portion is the answer to that question. You'd think I would have learned how to avoid this by now, but I always walk straight into it chin first, like the idiot I am, like the dog I am. Rebuilt, taken apart, put back together. In many different shades of blue, the colossus of roads destroyed, in an earthquake was never rebuilt. But I was time after time, regardless of the expense. I'm now in your debt, just as I am in so many others, and I will repay it, when I can or when I'm forced to, because accepting charity makes you weak. Is to ask for trouble. I've learned that much in my time here. It's better to surrender certain battles and live to fight another day, and to avoid paying debts. The singer. While I was in the coma and perilously close to cashing out for good, the doctors went to my wife asking permission to drill a hole in my throat and insert some other kind of breathing apparatus in there. A tracheotomy. They said it could change the way my voice sounded, but could very well bring me back from the edge and save me. She informed them that I was a singer, and if they did anything to change the sound of my voice, that wasn't going to fly. He has a one-of-a-kind voice, and to change it in any way could mean the end of his career, and he would rather die than have that happen. When I heard about this later, I was proud of her because she hit the nail on the head. Even though my relationship with singing, songwriting, and especially performing was ambivalent at the best of times, I would rather have been dead than have my voice fucked with in any way. I had spent my life singing myself sick in guitar bands, traveling town to town, country to country. I sang until my head pounded with pain after every performance, and the next day I would do it all over again somewhere else. It was all I'd ever had that had possibly done something good for someone, if not myself. Still, when put on the scale, my lifetime of shady actions and misdeeds outweighed anything positive my singing brought to the world by 1,000 miles. Mile high. Trees a mile high, no foliage, just long fingers, arms and trunks, white bark, dark blemishes, and silence. Forever I came here in my sleep and felt no human presence. This must have been something from memory, or a memory from another life that I don't remember awake, no matter. A phantom appendage is still aching long after the limb is gone. Like a church or courthouse that I got married in, a jail cell or hospital where I stayed a while. I didn't leave a trace of myself in them either, but they stained me. I wake up in the chair and can see it's still raining. Freedom is a multi-edged dagger at times. I was a mindless worker ant, and at others I was one of those with teeth that stood still and made sure the rest kept moving a lifetime. In destruction, tangling, untangling, always traveling with no destination, to finally touch down at this place where there is only one way out. I turn back to the page to obsessively invent still more damaged and heroic versions of myself before the fire dies out, or the well runs dry constructing imaginary worlds in which no opportunity. WW thrown away. As the days, weeks, and months trudged by, tarantula slow, I tried to force myself into some other reality, but the only memories I could muster were all attached to something I'd rather forget. The future was an unpromising unknown, and I could only look to the long-dead past for comfort, but it seemed as though there was not one unsullied moment to grab onto. I had spent my life in the shadows, facilitating my own and others' undoing, taking on nearly any dark task that came my way, every action a means to an end, the end being oblivion. After living on the East Coast for a time, on returning to Los Angeles, I had slept for quite a while in a car a friend had given me. Whenever I fell into an intimate relationship, it never lasted long. Where was I all night? What was I doing for money? Why was I lying? I never had an honest answer to any of these questions. Nearly every single affair was ended by the woman I was with, not me, and they often left with another man and a knife in my back, which I always had coming. I was a natural at losing, but as soon as one thing ended, I was already into something else. Friends kept me afloat with work or a place to stay, often overlooking my questionable behavior, and I was careful not to burn any of them. They gave me life in a world that would have gladly thrown me away. Below the equator, jungle warfare, the inferno burned, down to embers, listening for a phone call. That never rings. Nobody is listening. As far back as I could remember, I was constantly in trouble with the law one night. I was taking a piss behind a dumpster drunk, underage, when the cops came around the corner out of nowhere, shined their lights and said, "Hang on a second, but what?" I was looking for my wallet, found it. I said, "Who do you think you're kidding, pal?" "You're urinating in public bullshit." I said, "Don't smart me, boy. I'll take you to the woodshed," said one of them. "I'd like to see you try." I said, "Then you're going to get your wish, kid." The same cop said, subdued in under a minute. I was cuffed, hands behind back, and riding in the rear of the cop car down to the station, still maintaining my innocence and pleading my case that it was a misunderstanding. "You shut up back there, you little shit. Now you're done for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, disorderly conduct." What the fuck did I do? I went back there to find my goddamn wallet. "Don't you curse at me, you little fuck. You'll be sorry when I've got you in the tanks, and taking a leak in public is disorderly conduct, you dumbass." I started to protest again when the driver suddenly braked hard and my face smashed against the plexiglass divider, busting my nose, causing blood to shoot out it. "God damn it, Bob," said the cop riding passenger, and then they both started laughing. As I sat in the back, cuffed so tight my circulation was being cut, blood soaking my shirt, they drove right past the police station and turned back the way we came from, which alarmed me slightly, thinking I might be being taken to a real woodshed somewhere and iced. "Hey guys, it's cool. I'm a very quiet guy. I don't ever talk to anybody." "Well, you sure as hell have talked too much to us tonight." "Special circumstances," I said. "I'll never talk about this again." "Go ahead and talk all you want, kid," he said while pulling up to the same dumpster I'd been pissing at earlier, getting out, opening the door, uncuffing me, and shoving me down the alley. "Nobody will listen to you anyway. Desert Goblin, tentpole curiosity content. Unknown half-dog, half-vinegaroon thing pissed on electric fence, making connection. Every god-grounded manual discipline, Vimana industry, quicksilver honey of oblivion, lunar circus revelation antecedent beyond all belief. Self-surgery. Age 14, having just finished smoking some weed behind a parked semi-truck. I was walking up on the elevated ground where the train tracks used to be down by the old fairgrounds in my hometown, looking at all these clean-cut junior rodeo dudes, sitting below on their horses, older, bigger than me, and the mouthy friend I was with. "Hey, you fucking idiots, nice cowboy hats!" he yelled out suddenly. 3 of them instantly dismounted and came running up the small hill towards us. I straightaway tripped my pal backwards over my leg, knocking him off his feet, and ran for the still existing trestle that spanned the width of 8th Avenue and ended where there is now. A Starbucks, I believe, but used to be. A hamburger joint. My erstwhile companion yelled, "Lanegan, you fucker!" And had worked. They were starting to pound on the hapless fool I'd been hanging out with. But right then my foot found empty air between the ties, and I went down, gashing my shin and ripping my jeans on the ancient wood. It hurt quite a bit, and I limped the rest of the distance across, up past 7-Eleven, onto the college campus, stole an unlocked 10-speed, and rode to my dad's place out in the countryside. A couple years later, I was drunk one night, sitting on a folding metal chair in my filthy bedroom, my father reading a book upstairs, never setting foot in the basement, which is how I intended it. My 13 pet rats running around doing whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, my dog Angie growling whenever one of them might crawl up on her back or get in her face. My sister out at Ed Nixon's house, and how I idolized him. She knew a rock star when she saw one, I'll give her that. The seemingly sophisticated charm, charisma, and attitude rarely seen in our redneck of the woods, with the dominating prowess on the basketball court to back it up. Her boyfriend was my teenage role model. My mother living in a dismal Black Widow-infested single-wide at Desert Air, a seedy, rundown trailer park full of older, bridge-playing gay women down on the banks of the Columbia River, halfway through the wastelands to the Hanford nuclear plant, where she worked nothing but sand dunes as far as the eye could see, and not the inviting kind either, with a sewing needle, tip wrapped in thread. I was tattooing a crude smiley face on my knee dipped into a bottle of India ink stolen from the college bookstore, when I paused and took a look at the long scar on my lower leg from the train trestle. Wipe out a couple calendars earlier. As I felt and examined it for the first time since the accident, I could definitely discern something hard in there under the skin. Big, too. And peering at the semi-translucent scar tissue with my bedside flashlight, I thought I could see something dark in there as well. I took my folding buck knife out of my pocket, newly sharpened just the day before, and began to do a bit of self-surgery. I cut a long vertical incision down the entire length of the scar, causing blood to immediately start pouring onto the cement floor of my room. I kept cutting, drinking, blasting Hendrix full volume. This was going to take a while. The wound had been deep, scar tissue shiny but tough. I looked up and saw a line of rats with Angie in the middle, all standing side by side, greedily lapping up the blood pooled there as a result of my handiwork. I kept digging and finally reached pay dirt, prying out a 4-inch long, thick sliver of prehistoric, shellacked railroad tie wood that had been buried in my leg for years because I had never cleaned it out or even looked at it. Before that night, from then on, when discussing our plans for the future, I'd always tell my shitbag pals I was going to go to med school in the Caribbean when I got the fuck out of that 2-bit town, as if. Favorite games. Once again, I'm working late, forsaking sleep, crawling like a snake. Now it's time to play my favorite game, the one I learned from you. Falling Star. Spring had come, and I was still laid up in the sick bed. Besides the bitterness that was flowing out of me due to my circumstances, I was also aware of the global situation, and the knowledge that I would not be allowed to go anywhere, even if I were released, put me into a mood verging on hopelessness. I had been traveling for over 30 years, and the thought of having that taken away struck me as catastrophic. The only thing that had, ever, kept me engaged was whatever door opened in front of me, and I would always go through it, never knowing what was on the other side. Now I couldn't see a door or any other way out, just a darkness, and who knew what would happen to someone like me who had caught this dread malady? Would I be quarantined indefinitely or locked up in some kind of sanatorium? Sure, they were giving people vaccines now, but I had missed that boat. There wasn't anything to be done if you'd caught it already. It's hard to know where you are when you're trying to read a map by the light of a falling star. What is it down there? throw a stone into the ravine, release a torn kite into an updraft, and set a newspaper boat adrift with lit candle cargo out across stagnant pools. I taste washing up liquid on my sugar spoon ashes in my coffee cup, regret in your kiss, and imminent oblivion in my restless sleep. Pray for me. Conspiracy theory. I was not religious, nor was my father. My mother was Catholic. Having been raised by fanatic Christian cultists, my father had a particularly virulent strain of anti-religion in him, which he passed on to me, and getting either of us to participate in some godly farce was like getting a vampire into a church. As time rolled slowly by and my condition didn't change, however, I began thinking about a paranormal cure. But of course, that was just so much wishful bullshit. If there really were a vengeful God, I had every expectation of having some excruciating hurt thrown at me. It would have looked at me and seen what I'd done, and no doubt would have made me pay. I started wondering about this epidemic on a larger scale, and came to the conclusion that there was probably an agenda behind it. Erosion of conventional family and business, implication of one world government, and all that jazz. The best way to take people's freedom is in incremental stages until it's too late to reverse the course of history, and a huge global cataclysm was the fastest and easiest way to start that ball rolling. When had my mind begun to turn this way? Oh, right. Whenever I had done uppers with nothing downtown to balance them out. Under those circumstances, these ideas seemed reasonable enough to me. But then again, in only 4 years, 50% of Europe's population died from bubonic plague, 200 million dead, and in 1918 the Spanish flu had infected a third of the world's population, wiping out 50 million, so what the fuck did I know? Not a goddamn thing, in fact. At any rate, shit was starting to get very dark in my mind, and as I had hours of boredom and nothing much else to think about, these various conspiracies and black thoughts began to invade my head. In Ireland, people would not dream of being sold out to globalists by politicians. To me, it not only looked possible, but probable. Here and everywhere else. Planned, executed. I'll be goddamned if this wasn't planned too perfect, too scripted, too prepared, too quickly clamped down, too many dead, too thought out, too fucking wrong, and too goddamn planned out, as I may have mentioned before.
It was.
Alternate life. While I lay intubated in a coma for 3 weeks, my mind was having a field day, living it up. I imagined I was traveling wherever, playing music, fighting, fucking, etc. 15 years earlier, I had been in a coma for 8 days and then just woke up. No visions or nightmares, just blackness. That was far from the case this time around. The people populating this dream landscape were a mixture of those I knew from real life, those I vaguely recognized from somewhere, and an entirely new cast of characters my chemically sleeping brain invented. In one moment, I would be trying to swim a river wild and wide, as dark as it was deep. In another moment, I was dangling on the edge of a cavernous quarry, trying to hang on. I was flying on a private jet, participating in my favorite sexual escapades, raising hell, all manner of crazy shit. When I was brought out of this prolonged induced slumber, I was incredulous at what I was being told. It seemed like a joke. The life I had lived during the coma was so vividly real, I had a hard time believing it was not. The fact that I had been out for 21 days shook me some, but much of what I had experienced during that time was indelibly stamped on my brain. How could it not be real? As I started going through these bent backwards recollections, I realized something that gave away the truth. I had been barefoot throughout all these adventures. That's when I admitted to myself the real nature of these memories. I would never be without my boots on. In fact, I had even slept with them on for long stretches of my life, in case I had to get out in a hurry. Mid-January, the dogs and dregs of winter, I've always had a bad habit, several bad habits, but one in particular is the tendency to mirror my surroundings with my mood turning dark again, courting havoc and mayhem, fucking shit up as usual. A manager I once had told a girlfriend of mine, Lanegan is the Titanic, you'd better get off before he goes down. She didn't listen and then wished she had, but that was in Los Angeles years ago. What was my excuse then? The truth is, I could turn brilliant sunlight dark as the grave with my deadly powers of perception. I guess it's all in how you choose to look at things. The luck of a soldier. I was told I was to begin physiotherapy, and the next day a porter came in, put me in a wheelchair, and took me down to the basement gymnasium. 3 doctors watched as I managed to hit every mark taped on the floor using a walker. I was cold and uncomfortable, but I also knew that my quickest route out of there was to perform as if I were unimpaired, so I concentrated on getting the job done. After one circuit, however, my breathing was so labored it echoed loudly through the room. This wasn't going to work. Getting oxygen was so difficult, it was still as bad as it had been when they'd brought me there in the first place. Wheezing, dry coughing, and a deep echoing sound from down in my chest made it clearly obvious that I was far from well. As a teenager, I smoked weed around the clock and developed a loud hacking cough that was so overwhelming I was sometimes asked to leave the classroom due to the disruption it caused. After a harrowing bad acid trip, I was unable to smoke weed anymore without bringing on a flashback, my savior having viciously turned on me, and when I quit, I would for weeks cough pure black mucus out of my lungs, which got lighter in color until after 6 months it was a dull gray. As I was always in trouble with the law, my probation officer suggested I join the National Guard, and that sounded reasonable to me. I thought it would get me out of town in trouble. At age 15, I had to get my father's okay, and he signed the forms, though, against his wishes, and he told me so. He had been in the Army himself and got out just before the Vietnam War, his experience an apparently unhappy one. As I sat down to take the 4-hour written test, I quickly concluded that I knew shit about shit. Every single question was so far beyond my comprehension that I left page after page totally blank. Once I was done, I had my father rescind his approval, and with that, the luck of a soldier had once again turned, and I continued to careen like a demented pinball off anything and anyone in my way, piling up a small mountain of sorrow, calamity, sadness, and trauma. The darkest part. At times I've struggled to love life, and when a huge flock of blackbirds roll across the sky, I wish I could go with them. When a woman gives herself to me in all my loneliness, it's more than I deserve. When mist hangs on the water and I have learned another lesson hard, it's straight to the darkest part of me. And a lesson is hard to take when it's the painful kind, but I will take it every time. And the suffering that I endure and all the pain that I have caused will someday be the sorry end of me, so I apologize now. And though I have often failed, and I will again, God knows the better part of me, I will again, better part again, God myself. It was like I was standing outside myself. I know that feeling, looking at myself from a distance. Like I were there, but not really. As though it were someone else doing it, not me. I've experienced these phenomena multiple times, and problems of perception can drive some people to distress. In a way, they've saved me, because even if I've paid a price at times for some of my baser behaviors, mostly it was like I was never even there to begin with. Not me, though. Gray sky. Gray sky, I left you behind full time. 20-odd years ago, I moved to the desert to escape the rain, or so I said, but it was really to escape myself didn't work. Obviously, the circular nature of life has never escaped me, though, just like I said I'd never cook again, and then learned to grudgingly enjoy it as an inexpensive form of therapy, to clear my aching head. Here I am back in the gloom and the doom, doing interviews on Zoom from my cold, rainy island kingdom. Going bad. As April turned to May, I found myself sliding into what felt like black mood clinical depression, and I was on the precipice of losing a fight against it. I had to leave the hospital, and that was the only thing I thought about all day. Everyone who interacted with me, porters, nurses, and doctors, all knew I was obsessed with getting out, and all of them used any opportunity to talk me into staying. My mind was starting to go bad again. I began going over and doubting every decision that had brought me here. Hellhounds at my back in Los Angeles, I had rashly put my house up for sale, sold it in less than 3 weeks, and bought a plane ticket to Ireland before the property was even sold. My shaky plan was to land in Dublin, quarantine for a couple of weeks, and then move on to Portugal, my preferred destination. My pal Donal Logue owned a home in County Kerry that was sitting empty at the time, and when he offered it to me, I was grateful. Once I had seen the physical beauty of the place and quickly made some friends, I decided, fuck it, I'll stay here. After all, it was the place where my oldest known ancestors had come from, and I had always enjoyed great audiences whenever I played here. The majestic mountains, lakes, and forests called me, and I listened. After 23 years in Southern California, it took a slight adjustment to get used to a cold, wet winter again. But that was nothing. I felt like I had finally made it home. I set up my recording gear and put down a bunch of demos for a future record. Then, with the encouragement of my friend Wesley Isold, I started obsessively writing poetry. When I had at least 3 books of poems done, I started drawing with charcoal and oil paint on canvas, something I'd never done before, and soon the house was packed with my primitive artwork. I had been careful to keep to myself when out in public. The last thing I wanted was to catch some shitty virus and die. But when a journalist from Belfast contacted me to do an interview and photo session, I agreed. The day after he had been at my house, he called to tell me he had tested positive for the COVID-19 virus, and he was sorry. Not knowing if I'd infected him or him me, I honestly thought, okay, no need to panic. I'm sure if I have it, I'll be one of those who just floats through it as if they have a common cold. But instead, I was one of those who got flattened by a steamroller. It came on extremely fast and hit me like a freight train. Within 3 days of him calling, I was coming apart at the seams. Deaf, unable to breathe, unable to walk, and on my way to the most desperate holiday of my life, the back lot. Goodbye, old city, you were good to me until you were not. Goodbye, speed freaks and dope fiends, so long dealers and gangbangers, strippers, escorts, addicts, roadies, and thieves. I'm going to miss you all. You got to believe that, because my world is going to be a sadder gig without you in it. I'm trying to picture how that looks, and I can't quite yet. I guess I'm going to learn how, but it won't ever be easy, because I've been plagued with dyslexia all of my life, and I always fall asleep in class and never do my studies because I'm always lost in dreaming. 44,444, 445,555, chemical protection. As far as I know, the only times I've had multiple personalities were when I was in an alcohol-induced blackout. Then I was definitely another animal, just tiny visual flashes or no memory at all of what I said or did. That can be somewhat off-putting the days and weeks following a bender, in the sleeping state, like my shadow self did. I recall my first court-ordered 12-step meeting at age 14, 1978. The guy running the show, a burly, surly-looking old dude, said, I woke up in a jail cell in 1957 and they told me I'd killed a man. Then I spent the next 18 and a half years in the penitentiary without any memory of having done it. And afterwards, my buddy, who I'd bribed into giving me a ride and attending it with me, said, God damn, Lanegan, I swear if you keep drinking, that's going to happen to you. Luckily, it didn't, but everyone who was friends with me at that time knew at a certain point my brain might shut off and my body would keep going, for miles, in fact. And around the age of 15, I said to myself, man, you're going to have to quit drinking someday, but thank God you'll always have weed. And that shines a small ray of light on my mindset most of my life. I've never enjoyed being fully present. A muted reality has been the landscape I've preferred and mainly inhabited forever. Sure, feeling is good, but not too much. And if someone is able to get away with suffering devastating loss, massive regret, heartache, physical agony, mental instability, isolation, humiliation, abuse, incarceration, depression, tragedy, etc., with a blanket of chemical protection, then who can say it's wrong? Yes, I've run myself ragged at times and put myself through the mill, but when someone poses the question, how did he survive? It might be that they are not operating with the full spectrum of the circumstances. Whatever. I spilled gin all down my shirt, I took a piss and missed the bowl. I watched Kurosawa all day long and wept all night like a weak fuck crawling the carpet. I was a viper, too. I could have poisoned the entire municipal water supply with my venom, like I poisoned myself. Whatever came my way, I did a garbage can, an incinerator, a lowest rent Billboroughs, or so I might have thought, but chemicals don't equal to talent, as is the case with so many great pretenders. I've been A, quick with the cowardly disappearing act. B, constantly throwing red on white walls. C, always crying those lame crocodile tears. D, caught more than once rifling through somebody's coffin. 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0. Do you remember me? 0 0. Do you remember me? Say something new. As my diseased body continued to lie on a hospital bed, my diseased mind was continuing to devour itself. I had never come up against anything I couldn't beat or escape before, and the coronavirus turned out to be the mythical beast that had my number, teaching me beyond all doubt that you can't outrun what you can't see. My patience and strength were totally gone, and though I kept waiting for some improvement in my condition, it was not forthcoming. In fact, many days I felt as though I were still getting worse. Toughness, tenacity, balls, fire, audacity, and a rock-solid getaway plan had always been my strengths in any battle, but they were not going to serve me here, far from it. I may as well have been a caterpillar fighting a crow, toothless. I was well used to having my fortunes turn on a dime and the bottom dropping out, but I was also used to having a plan B, C, D, etc. to fall back on. This thing refused to let me go, and for the first time ever I sensed I were completely helpless, an unfamiliar state that not only stoked a fiercely confused rage, but also a total rethink of everything I had imagined to be true. Could it really be possible that after whistling through the graveyard for all these years, I was finally going to be put down? Like this? No fucking way. Every time these questions ran through my head, my immediate response was, I'll be damned if I go out like this, no fucking way. Plane crash, auto crash, gunfire, murder. When I imagined my death, these had always looked like the most likely candidates, and it made me particularly angry that my life could end like this, lying in a goddamned bed, denied a battlefield. As I looked around the room, it was impossible to gauge my condition based on the other patients. Everyone was at least 20 years my senior, and honestly, none of them seemed very sick to me, just very, very old. A friendly nighttime doctor from South Africa had looked me up on the internet and was now an enthusiastic fan of my singing. One night he dropped by to share with me his ideas on how to achieve future success once I was released. If I were to follow his plan, I could easily pay off not only my huge medical bill, but also make $1 million on top of it. I had heard similar musings many times before from other well-wishing souls, but what I really needed was for someone to say something new, because at this stage of the game, it seemed to me exceedingly doubtful that I was going to survive this ordeal, much less ever sing again. Destined to fade into nothingness, a tiny stain on history, forgotten already, and any notion to the contrary had to be some fucked up magical thinking. Case study. Go ahead and do as I've done, crawl like a slug, eat garbage, break yourself into sleep, with trash will yourself into oblivion. Crack yourself into the netherworld, drink yourself to death, reduce yourself to nothing, become a rabid animal camp out next to the freeway in the rain, carry balloons in your mouth, swallow them if need be, search through your shit to find them again. Draw up water into a rig off the hood of a car, hide behind a dumpster, cook it up in the torn-off bottom of an aluminum can, and shoot disappear before you are found. Get out before they catch you. Chew up if you are trapped. Blast out the windows with a gun, point it at your associates and yourself, and nearly pull the trigger again. Be spit on, discounted, disregarded, laughed at, written off, given up for dead, and then fuck shit up by living to tell the tale of your destruction and who you encountered on the way to the killing floor. Inhabit 1,000 dive rooms, 100 jail cells, 50 rehab beds, 12 psych wards, walk the streets all night, every night, scream at yourself like a dictator, comport yourself like the freak you are cut loose from any friends or family, dance into the grave. And out again, sing like a wounded grizzly bear or a disinterred mummy, and fuck yourself to the very gates of Hades and back out there. How'd that feel? Some people experience freedom in being completely unhinged and lost out on the flip side of polite society, but it takes some balls, a battleship full of psychic willpower, or flat-out insanity, along with a shitload of stamina and a grip of self-hatred, but no brains at all to find it. Good luck with that. Part of the equation. Still suffering from brutal insomnia, not able to shut my head off, painful memories of my youth and adulthood, and the mental corrosion of my present situation not letting me go, the regrets, mistakes, and the overwhelming sadness of a wasted life that looked like it could very likely be over at any time, when I felt like I had so much more I needed to put right. I was now being weaned from sleep and pain meds, something that cast me into an even darker mood than I had been in previously. As I lay awake night in, night out, my musings were difficult to get a handle on. What would my chances of survival be had I caught this thing in Los Angeles or somewhere else, a place with a larger population and more medical facilities? I came to the conclusion that my chances were actually better here. My wife had told me that the entire time I had been in the coma and on kidney dialysis, I had been the only patient in a large empty room, and knowing that I was receiving such specialized treatment gave me a modicum of mental relief. And I was grateful for Shelley's vigilance. I'd been told that she had sat there bedside for several hours a day, keeping a lonely watch. But it took less than a second for my perspective to flip and see things from the other side, and a sunny day was suddenly midnight black. As wildly unhinged as I had lived, I was always aware of the looming specter of death, most of my closest friends already dead for years. I had always known I was operating on borrowed time. My condition had not changed for quite some time, still not able to walk, my voice just a ghostly whisper, daily battles with staff over my continued refusal to give blood or eat, and I was sure I was finally close to going permanently lights out. But that was only part of the equation. The other part was my stubborn refusal to let go of this current dark reality, no matter how bleak, painful, or hopeless that might look. Mostly dead. They're almost all gone. Now my old gang, I'm in my 50s, but most of them died in their 20s or early 30s. At best, it's been a long, lonesome couple of decades out here in the wilderness alone. I treasure laughter when it comes, and lean towards some new alliances, as well as the few that are left behind like me. But there's not many around these days. This is the price I have paid for stubbornness and recalcitrance, amongst many other shortcomings. I have never really known how to give up the ghost. Zero charm. With a dead-eyed vacancy, I had come up out of the endless, deserted, wind-whipped fields of eastern Washington state between the Cascade Mountains to the west, and desert to the east. A pugilistic know-nothing nobody, midnight train whistle, and pockets full of rocks in case of an attack by dogs. While walking the long country roads to my house at night, a common occurrence. I did not make friends easily, and I was constantly fighting with anyone at all, never backing down even if it meant getting my ass kicked, which it often did. I spent my solitary youth looking for any chance to steal anything that presented itself, living to get loaded, obsessively taking my classmates' money with gambling devices I had spent hours modifying to make sure no one would win but me. One of my first girlfriends said, "I really want to like you, but it's fucking impossible," and that statement set the stage for countless relationships going forward. I didn't know how to ride easy, and I had no interest in learning how. To do that was contrary to everything I believed. To ride easy was to set yourself up to get fucked, and not in a pleasurable way either. If you were not a soldier on the wall, you were an abject defeatist, and in my book, there was no in between. The dysfunctional home life I enjoyed made me place my reliance strictly on myself and nobody else. I trusted no one, and no one should have trusted me either. I was only in it for yours truly, and stood directly in the center of the world, the only wolf in the pack. I got by through imitation, acting as human as possible, but there was an exceptionally ugly and devious animal just below the surface, and it was quick to strike whenever it felt threatened. Sledgehammer. I took a sledgehammer to a car. My teammates already hated me. For charity, it cost 548 days a year with good behavior, drove and drove and drove, with no destination. Coach Sweeney wanted me to be a lineman. I had other plans. "You're not a quarterback, never going to be a quarterback," he yelled once, and then suddenly I was long enough to throw a ton of interceptions, get a few concussions, and grow to hate the sport of American football after taking a vicious hit to the head. I puked in the fireplace after a game. My old man put down his newspaper and said, "What the hell?" My bell got rung hard so many times, and I always had it coming. I'd have shit-talked the president, or Jesus, my default state of being no fucks given. To a grievous fault, it's amazing I got out alive, but of course there's no way on earth it's going to last forever in the arms of an overpowering malaise. I had reached a turning point. There was no possible way I could stay in the hospital any longer, and even though I was still not able to walk unaided, I was leaving. My first order of business was talking my wife into my plan, which wasn't easy since she knew she would basically become my caregiver until I was well. After stressing the point that I was fine, or at least I soon would be, she finally agreed. And then I had to have similar conversations with several doctors and nurses. Francie agreed with me. He could see that I was gripped by an overwhelming malaise, and thought, as I did, that being in my own home would do me good. Motivated for change, my mood lifted as I anticipated getting out. I overlooked the difficulty of just getting from a wheelchair into the taxi, and again from car to my couch, but once it was done, I sat there fighting for air again. I instantly started to question my decision, and thought about the multitude of times and ways I had fucked myself in the past by not listening to the opinions of those who knew so much more than me. Had I set myself up for my final undoing? Should I have stayed? The scorpion had become drunk on his own venom as usual, and when that commonly occurred, I was only able to see things from one perspective, my own. Bleeding out. Slice through the pulsating jugular, bleed me out. Prop up my cadaver, dress it in a black suit, take its photo, and print up a new wanted poster, "Captured," this one says, but it should really say "murdered." I've been caught again, the animal put down. I've heard it said that a person has lived infinite lifetimes. I have lived 1,000 wrapped up in this one. Here the loop repeats over and over. One ends, another begins so fast it could turn your stomach, the wretched carousel revolving ever faster, until it throws you off onto the muddy ground surrounding the ride and lining the floor of the itinerant carnival midway. Straight, razor sharp. For the first few days I was home, I could still not walk normally, sleep for any decent stretch, eat without the food making me sick, or find any real joy in anything, even though I had managed to mostly throw off the shroud I wore in the hospital. After a while, I started dragging myself upstairs by sitting on the steps and pulling myself up backwards with my hands. Eventually, I was walking without a walker. 10 weeks in, and I was still in a good amount of pain, though. My lungs aching, chest sore, leg discomfort keeping me awake at night. This illness also seemed to unlock something in my subconscious, and I was dreaming more than I had ever remembered doing before. Vivid imaginings that seemed to mainly echo my real-life experiences the first 10 years or so I had spent in Los Angeles, driving all night like a maniac, hauling ass in my piss-yellow Buick from San Diego to Bakersfield, Venice to Joshua Tree, and back again. As I tried to fall asleep at night, the previous night's imaginings would come back and I would start mind traveling again. The days still crept by like a snail, and I sometimes thought that whatever damage I may have suffered from COVID might be permanent. Just as I had experienced while in hospital, any noticeable change in my physical condition was so incremental as to feel intangible. I waited day in, day out for that to turn, trying my damnedest to stay calm and find some patience. But patience was far from being a strong suit of mine. I faced a daily war between my hopeful perception and what felt like an unchanging and still dark as fuck reality, made more poignant by the baseline fact that no one could really give me any truthful information about a person's future once they had caught the virus and survived. Was it going to come back at some point and finish the job of rubbing me out? Was I going to carry residuals from it for the rest of my days? What about mobility? Was I ever going to get back to where I was before this shit began? How fucked was I really? I would lie awake all night, fall asleep in daylight, and wake up in the late afternoons while sundown was already coming on, and wish to God the first had not woken up at all. More and more when I did sleep, though, my mind played a straight razor-sharp death dream on an endless loop. This vacant tomb calls out, "Come, I'm waiting for you." A she-wolf rips your skin, the melancholy buries you alive, a heretic recuses. Tuberculosis, cotton fever, and plague, the big top folds up and leaves, the elephant sleeps. The dead planets turn and turn and turn and turn. Turning you sapphire, making you untouchable, making you golden, folding you into ether, making you stardust. Music of silence. My interest in music was non-existent. I never put on a record, or picked up a guitar, or sat at the keyboard, and didn't care if I ever did again. Years earlier, I had experienced a similar falling out with music, also on the heels of a coma. But where that had disturbed me somewhat and made me worry about how I was going to get by, this time I didn't think twice. I already had enough weight on my mind without adding to the stress and strain. Music would come back to me or it wouldn't, and I was going to live with that either way. But first I had to learn how to walk and talk again, because my feet no longer knew where they were going, and my voice had forgotten how to sound. Some healthcare workers came to my house to do physical therapy with me, and were enthusiastic as to my progress in the 2 weeks I had been out. They said they had expected to need specialized equipment just to get me around the house, and were surprised that I was now walking up and down the stairs, no walker. And even though I was still ultra shaky, I could see the progress and was determined to put this brutal affair behind me, even though nobody had any idea how long a recovery from this goddamn thing would take, simply because nobody knew jack shit about this virus. As the physical therapy workers were leaving, one of the women asked if I had any more questions for them. All of us laughed because any questions were unanswerable. Everyone was in uncharted waters, everything blind speculation. After being home for a while, I started to regain a bit of energy, enough to start responding to the huge pile of emails and texts from friends and family. I would fire off a few each day. My most staunch supporters were those I had loved forever, and who had always been there for me no matter how badly I had behaved, how stupidly I had acted, or how many times I put them through the emotional ringer by tightrope, walking so far above where I had any right to, and diving way past my depth on an endless search for what I was never going to find. Black moon, red sun. Purple moss dangling, alive, reaching fog rolls across ancient palms, cleaning windows, scaling volcanic mansions, reaching a forgiving crest. Shadows dissolved, diseased countenance fires, extinguished rope, harnessed heavy surge military coat. Propane reignited handgun, stolen dry firing rough trade. Asphalt and addiction lungs, hacking black from nuclear sickness shackled at neck. Light sensitive and blindness. I'm in the back of a car dreaming aurora borealis. Only partway back. After being home for a couple of weeks, still in a black mood due to the slow progress of my physical recovery routine, and mainly stranded inside due to the icy, windy weather and COVID restrictions, I was rummaging around in my travel bag to find a razor to shave off the huge, ridiculous beard I had grown when I came across a lone painkiller. I quickly chewed it up and swallowed it. My immune system was still so compromised I went into a severe coughing fit, gasping for breath but not able to breathe, and I passed out. I came to back in the hospital again, Francie himself wheeling me through the lower floors of the institution to the X-ray and CT scan rooms to see what kind of damage I had done now. My wife had been forced to call an ambulance once again, and she was deeply unhappy with my stubborn, stupid, thoughtless conduct. I could sense her turning to stone, a common reaction I'd seen before. But whenever I looked back, I could rarely ever feel I'd done wrong, could never remember what I'd done or the reason why. But now, after everything, I was back where I'd tried so hard to escape from, and it was due to my own actions. I had foolishly left too early, against all advice. Drifting in and out of consciousness, I was half aware that they were taking the opportunity to search for veins, and felt jab after jab in my arms as they failed to hit one. Coming to for a minute, a few hours into the afternoon, I found that they had put a stent line into my knee, and that was working for them, much to my relief. As I was being brought from place to place for more tests, not enough energy to lift my chin off my chest, I felt a slight twinge of regret whenever I rolled past one of the doctors or nurses who had tried so hard to talk me into staying a couple of weeks prior. Mainly, I tried to ignore such feelings and continued to confidently act as if it didn't bother me. But when a particularly attractive doctor, who had spent quite a while trying to convince me to stay earlier, greeted me, I couldn't help but feel a momentary ache of shame. Shame for putting myself so quickly back into this same situation I had fought so vehemently to escape, with such boringly predictable tactlessness and such unseemly idiocy. God damn it. I was sure after a lifetime of doing as I pleased no matter the cost, I was too far gone to ever stop behaving in these impetuous, often deadly ways, and knew from painful experience and what passed from my heart that each and every time I walked out into the dark, I only ever came part of the way back. I quickly shook it off and told myself I didn't care if I was right or wrong, and that had always been my problem. One of my many, many problems. Vicious. Sickening waves gathering speed, slamming down, dragged back out to sea. My body is who I am, battered, bruised, beaten, and soulless. Violent instinct, ridiculous dreams. Harsh reality, I suppose I owe you a thanks. You could have killed me, but you didn't. But I won't let my guard down again. You can count on that. Re-entry is a motherfucker, but tenacity is a virtue in my book if you have the strength for it, and I do. You said you've known guys like me before, but in that notion you've made a slight miscalculation. What you thought was the end is only just now beginning. Half full, brutality of aging. Back in the hospital due to pneumonia in my lungs and infection in my blood, as well as what I would characterize as a dubious overdose, were anyone asking my opinion, which of course nobody was. I landed on the same ward where I'd recently spent months fighting to survive a murderous strain of coronavirus. I found that the geriatric company I was keeping now was even older than those I had been in with previously. Directly across from me was an angry old woman who I had seen try to knock a food tray out of a porter's hands, as well as yell some indistinguishable words over and over at the same young girl. This woman spent hours singing a loud, unmelodious song to her moth-eaten teddy bear, having endless conversations with the same stuffed toy, in a high-pitched voice not one word of which could I understand. The man on the other side of her talked loudly and constantly in his sleep, yelling, "Jesus Christ!" And my God, the continual dismal shrieking of these people and the wailing, moaning and crying of the others set me on edge, and I struggled to keep from detonating. When I was a teenager, my Welsh maternal grandmother, an older and unbelievably more monstrous version of my mother, had been put into an elderly care facility in my hometown in a vegetative state. I was forced to accompany my mother as she went through the charade of visiting her mother's nearly lifeless body from time to time. And on one occasion, as I walked down the hallway, another resident in a wheelchair grabbed my arm and wouldn't let go. After a second, I realized this woman was an older friend of my mother's, one of her bridge-playing partners who had always been very nice to me, who had suffered a devastating stroke a few years prior. As I stood there in her grip, she looked up at me with the saddest, most desperate gaze I'd ever seen, and in that moment I understood that she recognized me and wanted help. I gently pulled her off me with my free hand and quickly walked outside and stood in the parking lot. As hard as I tried, I couldn't stop myself from crying, the ever-present wind blowing my tears straight back across my face. The harsh injustice of aging and the helplessness of infirmity was more than I could take. I swore I would die before I ended up like that. When my mother came out to the car and saw my red eyes, she impatiently demanded, "What the hell's wrong with you?" After more than a year in a coma, my grandmother suddenly came to and went on to live for several more years, some of them in our house, making my life even more hellish with her as the other half of my mother's vicious tag team. Now in the hospital, I found myself having these infuriating flashbacks, the youngest inmate of that same kind of old folks' prison. I had failed in my lifelong quest to go out before ending up here, naturally thinking I had years ahead of me before facing such a situation. At least I could get myself to the toilet, thank God. All of these unfortunate old souls had to get their shit-filled diapers changed, sometimes twice daily, and every time the workers came round to fulfill this unpleasant task, the patients put up a fight. Lots of yelling, cursing, and protesting. I felt bad for these people, and hated being witness to this indignity they suffered. After living lifetimes of mobility and self-sufficiency, being reduced to the humiliation of this routine, their fierce pride would have them continue wearing a dirty pad rather than let a stranger wipe their ass. During this second stay, I started to feel somewhat physically better, able to walk unaided and sleeping better than before, the cup feeling half full for once. I couldn't tell if this was actually some kind of recovery from the virus or just a small lucky streak, but whatever. I was glad to be feeling partially normal for the first time in forever. Of course, this made my urge to leave kick in with even more intensity than before. A friend once told me it's better to get old than not considering the alternative, but I am of the Pete Townsend school of thought. I hope I die before I get old. Delusional. Here in mostly rural Ireland, I found myself looking out the same hospital window I had when I'd first come out of a coma months earlier. The view from my bed brought back memories of my delusional dreaming as I had drifted in and out of consciousness, sure that I were someplace I was not, traveling thousands of miles a day, probably talking shit to whoever I encountered, and wanting to leave, no matter where I really was. It seemed as though the symptoms and pain of the COVID pneumonia that had been beating my ass down so intently had abated. My breathing came slightly easier, and there was less aching, soreness, and discomfort in my lungs and upper body afflicting me now. Since my life wasn't deemed to be in immediate danger anymore, my wife was no longer allowed to come and go, as she had when the staff here had thought I was on the verge of dying. But luckily, Francie lived just 5 minutes from the hospital and would come by to wheel me out for a smoke now and then. Terraplane. Split the deck. Somebody suspicious. Foraging around covert operative. 7 of Wands, Queen of Cups, 7 of Swords, collective reading ascension process, transformation, light and dark oil the machine and manifest upwards. Self-inflicted. On a Friday afternoon, the doctor had told me he was going to take a look at my lung x-rays and probably let me go the next day. On Saturday, however, I saw not one doctor all day long and found out there would be none coming by until Monday. This made me silently furious. Yes, I had possibly nearly died again, but that was days ago. Now I felt better than I had this entire time, and there was no way I was staying here until Monday. I was going to try and get a script for the antibiotics they were giving me for my lungs, and then I was getting the fuck out. I was particularly unhappy that I was back in here due to my own fucked up decision making, but here I was on the edge of repeating the exact same mistake again. I was well aware that no one gave a damn about what I would like to see happen. They were just going to toe the company line. After harassing anybody who walked by with requests to see a doctor, I was finally granted a meeting with one. She listened to my lungs for half a second and said, "I can't let you go." At this, I sat up and said, "Well, I'm going anyway," and asked what was happening here that I couldn't do at home. Yesterday, I had not seen a physician all day, just lay in bed, endlessly waiting for the time to pass. I was more than able to do the same thing at my own house, and emphatically told her so. Another hour or so crawled by. She then reappeared with a waiver form that I hastily scribbled on and was released against advice once again, but not before being warned that my blood showed levels of infection and I had better see a GP in no less than 2 weeks. Impossible odds. Story of my life. My sex history book in shreds, like a naked body. I only woke up with a few dozen or so, and the band played on. Meanwhile, people were dying by the hundreds daily in India, where the pandemic was in full-on fucked-up swing. Most Western countries were working overtime to try to get people vaccinated, but that was not the case everywhere. Bodies of the COVID dead were being tossed into the Ganges River, and unfortunate multitudes were literally expiring in the streets. Fighting for breath, no room for the dying in the hospitals, and nothing to be done about it. Only the wealthiest citizens could afford to lock themselves up in their homes, stocked up on food, so as to never have to come into contact with the millions in the streets, and by doing so, escape this hideous plague. As I read the accounts of these horrors, I recognized once again how lucky I had been to be treated in Ireland, which was one of the first places to get hit hard and seemed to have a pretty good playbook on how to keep people alive by the time I landed in the hands of the medical professionals here. The doctors and nurses all ultra kind and concerned, working hard around the clock to see to the patient's comfort and well-being. I felt a cutting, raw chagrin when I thought about my obvious self-centered juvenile impatience, bordering on rudeness at times, rarely making things easy on these selfless workers who were doing their best just to see me live, to help me survive this thing. I wanted to get my head screwed on right and start exhibiting some heavily owed gratitude towards these people, but I was not equipped for such nuances and could not bear to hide my unhappiness. This continued stay, now well over 3 months, was brutalizing my mind. Almost as soon as my course of antibiotics was finished, it became difficult to breathe again. My lungs and back racked in pain with every breath I fought to take. When I went to my meeting with the GP, he took a quick listen to my lungs and said, "You need to go back to the hospital immediately or you're going to die." The lake frozen over, white and dull gray, icy blue hues. The last go-round, shocked stupid by the doctor's adamant, candid insistence regarding my upcoming death, I still could not stand the thought of returning a third time to the Cary Hospital, especially after I had left twice already against all advice. Despite the care shown to me by everyone there, my fucked up pride would not allow it. The next day, my close friend Tony O'Flaherty, a talented local music producer, engineer who I often hung out and recorded with, drove me to the University Hospital in Cork, a much larger city and facility. I had actually recorded a song for someone with Tony in his studio later in the same day I had caught the virus. He tested negative a day later, much to my relief. It would have been tough to live with had I infected him or his family. Now we rode mainly in silence, masks over our faces, on the old two-lane road from Killarney down to Cork, passing closed-up pubs, churches, and chip shops, wind blowing the long green grass and leaves on the trees like waves on the ocean, flocks of sheep and herds of cattle lounging in the fields. We finally arrived at 3 p.m., and as I got out of the car, my wife looked into my eyes and, thinking it might be the last time she'd see me, said, "Baby, I love you." I walked away towards the hospital doors. I was quickly admitted at the emergency entrance and then waited for 6 long, frustrating hours before being seen by a woman who struggled to find a vein. She managed to get one eventually, the deep red-black blood oozing out syrup slow, her saying, "Come on, don't stop," until her syringe was totally full. I was then left sitting in the cement-stiff chair for another 3 hours before I was called into the back to see a doctor. After listening to my lungs and heart, he ordered yet one more CT scan and round of x-rays, which all came back healthy, but he was worried I may have had a blood clot. After being told not to move in case I shook a clot loose, I lay my 6-foot 2-inch frame on a thin, rock-hard 5-foot-long cot in the brightly lit room until morning, when I was to see a different physician for more tests. A few hours later, another doctor and a couple of interns came by. He asked me what had brought me here. When I told him what the GP had said, he laughed and shook his head. "Well, that was a bit dramatic, and you decided to wait another day before coming in? The tests show me that your blood, lungs, and kidneys are healthy and all your..." With that, he prescribed some more antibiotics, steroids, an inhaler, and some blood thinners, and after making an appointment to be seen at the clinic there once more, I walked out into the light, drizzling rain and gray morning skies, for the first time with the blessing of the doctors. The ravages of the virus would go on to take a very long time to heal, but I got into a cab, cautiously optimistic that I might finally be on my way towards something resembling freedom. Freedom being relative, of course, the softer landing. Let me fall, but let me rise. Don't let heaven or hell and me collide, to be a horse, to be a train. I wouldn't have the heart next to the tracks. You see a ghost wearing a sling, the mockingbird, you hear it weeping until all is done, and down to dust. When kingdom comes, you will be singing a song of hope, a song of love caught in your throat, so never ending. 808 888 quintillion, 888 quadrillion, 888 trillion, 888 billion, 888,888,888. oceanof-pdf.com. Acknowledgements. Shelley Bryan, Amy Lee, Wesley, Isold, Lee Brackstone.
All right, that's it. And the fans and sent ripples to the scammer and bully and misinformation artist Michelle Wilkins, who worked with the team Daily Mail, even though we know he isn't. She said this conclusion followed an exhaustive review of the autopsy findings and misinformation so that ultimately the case doesn't get solved. Hyped up joke again. And the fact that they are saying that Mark Lanegan wasn't there and getting people to and comment on my channel saying I'm an idiot for thinking Mark was even there when Who Killed Kurt are saying he wasn't. And they know he was because of speaking with person didn't die very organ damage associated with oxygen deprivation. The necrosis of the brain and liver happens in an overdose. It doesn't happen in a shotgun death. Well, if you bully people and you can do anything, you can be known for this, even though you're not doing a good job. There's a difference between being known for the Kurt Cobain case and actually doing a good job. Hearing Joe Burns speak to you over the phone saying Mark Lanegan took part in the attack and the murder, and then going online and saying Joe never said that to anybody, and getting people to believe that Mark Lanegan had nothing to do with it, at the same time that you're putting out these documents that are good, that's questionable. That makes your motives questionable. And I will fucking go after anybody doing that. Legally, of course. I'm not going to put up with that in this case. I know it happened in Isaac Cappy's case, and I know it's happening here, and I'm going to speak up against that. I'm still working on getting my own article out there. Anyway, our detective concluded that he died by suicide, and this continues to be the position held by this. Many papers in his left pocket of his jeans. It looks like someone staged a movie and wanted you to be absolutely certain this was a suicide. For the cell, the shells are lined up. Why didn't you not mark, fuck? Why didn't you mention Mark Lanegan? Maybe they do. If you don't, then that's exactly what they're doing. They're doing something good, but also doing something behind the scenes to not make it go anywhere and just make it look like a big media hype again. And Courtney is always behind that shit. Even before I got involved with this, I knew that. Do I see anything about Mark Lanegan yet? Let's just see. No, I don't. So it's not even worth reading. Well, that was great. Did you guys even hear any of me? Isaac Cappy revealed this is happening. Okay, they put out something good with forensics people, but then they discredit what Joe Burns is saying to them over the phone, saying that, yes, Mark Lanegan was there, took part in the attack and the murder. Some fucking people will hype things up like that and make it look good, but put in disinformation as well, so the case gets nowhere ultimately. And it's always a big hype in the media that just passes with time. And Courtney is always behind those things. And I've known that before I even got involved in this case. Doing forensics work, getting people to do that is good. And getting people to look at it is good. But don't talk to Joe Burns over the phone with him telling you what happened. And then not even put that out there in the Daily Mail. And don't go online on YouTube and tell people Joe never said that Mark Lanegan was there, when he absolutely did. And if anything, they probably record every call they have with Joe, so they'd have it recorded as well. The same thing happened with the Isaac Cappy case, and it happens with Corey Feldman trying to get justice for Corey Haim. They make some things look good, but people that are listening to the eyewitness over the phone and then going against what he is telling them. I don't even want to. That would be against what we're doing for Kurt. This isn't justice for Michelle Wilkins or fame for Michelle Wilkins or anybody else or Dean or whoever else or me. This is about Kurt and his daughter and his dad who's still here, and his bandmates and his friends and everyone that met him and felt really attached to him over the years that might not have even met him. And especially the suicide victims, the copycat victims. There wasn't a fucking mention of that in there either. I'm pretty sure Mark Lanegan wrote another book before he died. Just a second. Okay, just a second. Let me close some things I have up here. Can anybody hear me still? Or, oh, it's better now. Just a sec. I just need to look up what that last book was, what the other book was, of Mark Lanegan's. Okay, good. Thank you. Leaving California, Poems by Mark Lanegan, 2021. That one exists too. I wonder if I have that. Well, that gave fame to Michelle with her name, but she didn't mention Joe Burns or Mark Lanegan or Harvey and Dylan and anything that really matters about. I mean, the gun thing does matter, yeah, but it matters too when you say that Mark Lanegan wasn't there and go against what Joe is telling you over the telephone. He also wrote I Am the Wolf, Mark Lanegan. I have that one. Just a second. I'm going to play a little bit of that one for a bit. Okay, just a second. All right, 1 second. I Am the Wolf. This was 2017, I believe. Yep. 1 second.
I referred to it as the waiting area. Housemates and I referred to it as the waiting area at a morgue. It was cold and damp in the sparsely furnished, too brightly lit front room. Love seat, chair, turntable, heavily stained white carpet, shitty space heater, and light bulb realized where the infestation of fleas in the place was coming from. It was 1989, and although I had been playing rock music for a few years, I was still working stultifying dead-end jobs and was totally unmotivated and directionless about the future. At the pinnacle of my underachievement as an indie singer with screaming trees, Sub Pop Records offered me a solo deal, and that became the catalyst for my interest in songwriting. Prior to this, I had sometimes written words with the other members of my first band, or more often, had tried to change their lyrics to fit me in a more personal way. This was a tedious, frustrating routine that was never enjoyable, and so the winding sheet became my first attempt at going it alone. Since writing songs also meant playing guitar for the first time, my roommate Dylan Carlson showed me a chord progression that I used in about half the tunes, and Mike Johnson of the Eugene, Oregon band Snake Pit put intros, outros, and middle sections to them, becoming my primary accomplice and advisor in the process. The recording was made by legendary Northwest producer Jack Endino at Reciprocal Studio in 3 or 4 days, with him constantly assuring me that what we were doing was not terrible. The title for the record came from something I heard Maya Angelou say on a PBS television program. An inspiration for the songs was born of sadness and uncertainty with my circumstances at the time. Relationships, money problems, alcohol, depression, addiction, and so on. Sometimes serious, sometimes comical. Other motivations included the endless gray, rain-saturated days of Seattle and a preoccupation with death, as well as an ever-pervasive sense of impending doom. Feel-good stuff. Musical influence came from a love of the blues and of the introspective and poetic bent of Leonard Cohen, John Cale, Jeffrey Lee Pierce, Falling James Moreland, Ian Curtis, Nick Cave, and local Portland, Oregon.
Going back to Mark Lanegan singing, talking himself.
Chapter 40, Ice Cold European Funhouse. I'm waiting in the freezing rain at an uncovered bus stop after a show in Sheffield, England. The moment I left the stage, I walked out the back door of the club, down a long, dark alleyway, and around the corner to this cold and empty spot. I was dope sick. I was cold and wet. The band had no show the next day, yet Wilkins had refused to drop me off in London en route to the next city we were playing in because it was inconveniently out of the way. So I'd stayed behind while they rolled on. I had to fix sooner than that, or else it was going to be disaster. We were scheduled to be in Europe and the UK for almost another month, and things were looking grim for my prospects of staying well. I had already run out of my meager supply of methadone, and there were still many more shows to be played. Wilkins was long over me. I had routinely woken him up, as well as Josh Homme once, and even Lee Connor, at all hours of the night and early morning to hit him up for cash. I cashed advance in order to stay well. The last time I'd done it, he told me, "This is it, buddy. The last time. You've reached your limit. If you wake me up again, you're going to be sorry." I believed him. Kevin was a good guy, but tough. After years of tour managing Alice in Chains, getting them out of jams and shepherding their crew all over the world, he was tired. The last thing he wanted to deal with was yet another junkie, especially one in the aggravating habit of knocking on his door in the middle of the night. As I stood there in the rain, a young couple huddling together beneath an umbrella walked up. They had seen the show and wanted to talk. "Hey, Mark, just wanted to tell you how beautiful the show was. We love your music. What do you do?" "Brown. Do you mean heroin?" the girl gasped. They quickly found a reason to flee. My desperation to obtain relief so great that with zero care about what it looked like, what I looked like, I had taken to asking innocent young concert goers where I could score. It was time these kids grew the fuck up anyway, got with the motherfucking program, and faced the cold, hard reality of life. I had done my last tiny hit at 7:30 that morning, and it was now 10:30 at night. 4 days earlier in Manchester, I had been welcomed into the council flat home of a dealer I'd met on the street. He was overly generous, excited to have an American rock singer in the house. It was exactly 3 weeks and 1 day until my 32nd birthday, but I looked at least 10 years older, worn down from the demands of touring while battling the years-long, exhausting imprisonment of my crippling addiction. The balding man and his not unattractive blonde wife, both in their mid-40s, had let me stay up all night in their flat shooting dope and occasionally taking a hit off the crack pipe. Shortly before midnight, the man had said, "Come on, let's go grab some cigarettes from the shop." When we returned to the modest-sized public housing apartment, I was greeted by the sight of the wife lying on the couch, dressed in lingerie, her bare breasts exposed, pretending to be asleep. The man had walked over to her and started squeezing and rubbing her tits while I stood there uncomfortably in the middle of the room. She began to quietly moan and he said, "Nice, huh? Come on over here and get yourself a feel." It was an obvious setup, exactly the kind of situation I had lived for in my youth. But as an old man of 32, sex was the last thing on my mind. I shook. 4 days later, standing in the rain and going into withdrawals, my intention was to catch a ride to Heathrow and then take the tube into London to buy some heroin from a Portuguese dealer named Juan Joseph I'd met on one of my many excursions to King's Cross, a notorious London neighborhood where I always scored when in the city. I would then take the train to Bristol. The Hypnotics bass player Craig Pike, my old connection in London, had overdosed and died a couple years before. Now I habitually haunted this busy but shady neighborhood, scoring drugs whenever I was in town. In the several block radius around the large hub of the train station, you could almost always find someone selling drugs if you looked hard enough. Through the years, I'd formed regular connections with some street dealers I'd met at different times in the Cross. Out in front of the Ladbrokes betting shop, along the side street that paralleled the station, or near the porn magazine shop on the other side of it. Some would give me their phone number so we could hook up immediately when I was in need. Juan Joseph had actually taken me to where he lived, 3 long blocks from the station, so that I could go directly to his flat when I wanted to see him. My previous regular hookup was a young blonde punk kid in his early 20s. I had spotted him on the street one day and made him for either a dealer or a panhandler, and decided that even if he didn't have drugs, he'd sure as fuck know who out here did. Sure enough, when I'd approached him, he'd led me into an alley, unbuttoned his pants, and removed several balloons of heroin that he'd stuffed beneath the uncut foreskin of his dick. He kept them safely stashed there in case he was shaken down by the UK police, who at that time had the legal right to frisk anyone they cared to on the street, regardless of any evidence of wrongdoing. While walking together back to the bustling high street after doing our first deal, he'd asked me where I was from and what I was doing in London. I told him I was a singer from Seattle playing some shows. He stopped in his tracks straight away. "Fuck, Yank. I love all Seattle music. Look at this." He pulled up his sleeve to expose his arm. The kid was a cutter, something I'd only seen a couple times before. His forearm was covered with crude symbols and names carved into his skin with a razor or knife. He had messily cut into his flesh, "God bless Kurt," now manifesting as a large raised white scar.
Oh, wow.
"Damn, dude, a tattoo would have been less painful," I said, knowing full well that had been the point. Shortly after parting company from that first encounter, I'd passed 2 cops myself. They'd quickly given me the once-over 2 or 3 times, turned around and started following me. I'd unfortunately had no choice but to quickly transfer the balloons previously held under the skin of his cock from my coat pocket to my mouth so I could swallow them if stopped, questioned, and frisked. To be caught with drugs in the UK meant not only jail time in what were said to be some of the Western world's shittiest prisons, especially for foreigners, but also most certainly a life in the US. I was often stopped and searched by cops. The police often asked me to open my mouth to show them if I was holding anything within. On the couple of occasions I'd had to swallow my stash with nothing more than my spit to help choke it down, I'd been compelled to search through my own shit in the days following in order to find the balloons or rocks within, being more valuable than gold to me. My current Portuguese immigrant dealer wisely did not look the part. I'd met Juan Joseph when he'd actually approached me late one night while walking his dog on the King's Cross side streets. He'd seen me cruising the area, obviously looking for drugs. He told me to follow him a few blocks off the main drag to his flat, where he sold me dope and crack, gave me a clean rig, and allowed me to fix in his place. He had a thick accent that was difficult for me to follow word to word. He didn't shoot dope himself. Instead, he was one of a very small group of people I'd met throughout my shadow life that was addicted to shooting crack, not coke as was the norm. crack. In order to shoot crack, he had to break it down to liquid form. He first crushed the rock into something like a powder, then added citric acid like he did with dope. Instead of cooking it up, he just added cold water and continued to crush and swirl the now liquid with the plunger end of a syringe until it was a clear, not cloudy solution. When he tied off and did one of these shots of liquid crack, he immediately went into this crazed, fucked up, bizarre routine. As soon as the drug hit his bloodstream, his face contorted in a way totally mirroring that of a person with cerebral palsy. He'd stand up, and in a heavily animated and spastic manner, he would do a strange dance, falling around his kitchen, pulling violently and shamelessly at his dick through his baggy brown corduroy pants. In a loud voice, he would emphatically attempt to say something to me. Whatever it was Juan Joseph was trying to say, it took a Herculean amount of effort on his part just to spit it out as he struggled, stammered, and spasmed. Of course, through his twisted mouth and already thick, whatever he was loudly trying to say, it was impossible for me to understand. Not great company, but soaking wet from rain and the frozen cold pre-midnight waiting for the bus to Heathrow Airport, I desperately needed to see him. If I didn't make my way onto this bus, I was fucked in the worst way. I stood waiting, shaking and shivering in the bitter November night air. An hour passed, then 2 hours, still no bus. Now I began to enter a fairly advanced state of withdrawal, stomach cramping, cold sweat covering my body, mixing with and joining the cold rain running off my face and pouring from my soaked, hatless head. Finally, a short time after midnight, a bus going to Heathrow pulled up and let a couple of people off. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a 10-pound note and started walking up the stairs. Hey, mister, are you scheduled to take this bus? I don't see anyone on my list to be picked up here. List, I thought. What the hell? Yes, I should be on the list. Ticket, he asked. I forgot to bring it. Can I just give you cash? No, you cannot, mate. These buses are pre-ticketed, and my work ledger tells me this bus is fully booked to Heathrow. I've got people to pick up on the way. I can't take you. How can I get a ticket? You have to go to the local bus station during normal working hours or pay for it by credit card over the phone. Now off you go. Well, that was fantastic news. I hadn't the slightest clue as to where the station was. It was obviously closed anyway, and I had never even owned a credit card my entire life. I walked back down the steps, then turned around and asked, when is the next bus coming to this stop, sir? 3:30, mate, but you won't get on it either unless you booked it in advance. With this distressing knowledge, I got off the bus. I considered my situation. Completely empty, rain-washed streets, no extra money for the train, only enough for one from London to Bristol. No idea where either a bus or train station was. No dope in the foreseeable future. Soaking wet, freezing, going into withdrawals. No phone, no. My options were extremely limited. I absolutely had to wait until the next bus at 3:30. I would try this again, but with a new strategy. I would play on the sympathies of increasingly violently cursed Wilkins and the rest of the entire goddamn band and crew. How hard would it have been to go an hour or two out of their way to drop me off, where I could have taken a train directly to the huge station in King's Cross? None of those assholes had an ounce of compassion for my self-created plight. They had begun to refer to me behind my back as Mr. Burns, the old, bitter, bent-over and creepy boss on the Simpsons cartoon television program, slightly reminiscent of Klaus Kinski in the title role of Nosferatu the Vampire. I was admittedly getting skinnier and older looking by the day. I was constantly operating on no sleep, walking the local drug neighborhoods of every city and town we visited every minute of every night. I was not required to be with the band. Not in order to get high, forget about that. It was in order to just stay well, fully rationing every last grain. When I could afford it, I also needed crack, since I was obviously a fucking degenerate crackhead also. Every spare second was spent on my feet and wandering, haunted, sticking out like a raw cock in my by now filthy leather pants, eternally scanning the streets of the worst neighborhoods in every city we visited for more. I paced up and down the sidewalk behind the bus stop in the freezing rain. My hair and clothes were soaking wet, just the leather trousers not saturated with rainwater yet, shaking, shivering, and occasionally gagging on the verge of vomiting every second. I was constantly spitting out of my obvious charms. Every 5 minutes or so, I would try and sit for a moment of discomfort so high that I would inevitably stand right back up again. As the hours crawled by, I did not stop. Just when I began thinking seriously about trying to find a hospital where I planned to desperately throw myself on the mercy of the emergency room staff, stopping to let a few people off where I stood on the street, shaking like a victim of Parkinson's disease. After the last passenger got off, I quickly ran up the steps to where a kind-looking middle-aged female driver sat. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 3:30 a.m. "My lord, lad, how long have you been in the rain? You're soaking wet." I tried to hide my severe discomfort and talk normally. "A few hours, ma'am. I'm so sorry to put this on you, but I'm in an emergency situation. I got a call before midnight that my mother had been in an auto accident and is in hospital in London. They told me to come straight away as she might not make it through the night. I know I need a ticket for this bus, but it was after hours and I had no way to get one. I can pay cash. If I could just get to Heathrow, I can take the tube into the city. I pray to God I'm not too late." I poured out this river of horse shit as fast as I could, thinking I might puke at any second from the effort it took just to talk at all. With a sincere look of horror and empathy, she said, "Oh my, I'm so sorry, son. Please take the first seat behind me. This bus is mainly unbooked to Heathrow, and don't worry about payment. This is an emergency." I nodded my thanks and sat painfully down in the seat. I held my face against the window to feel the heat blowing up from the side of the cushion while fighting the urge to vomit. By the time the bus arrived at Heathrow, it was daylight, and I was now on the verge of serious withdrawals. I knew from experience that my body had been generating a gut full of midnight black venom for hours now. It took every bit of strength I had to not start shitting and vomiting it up. But I knew no matter what, my body would soon begin to successfully shit together. I got onto the train headed into King's Cross. It was morning rush hour, and getting off the crowded, standing room only train, I fought my way through the mob in a hurry to get to their jobs, physically knocked around from person to person like a human pinball, a raw, skinless human pinball of all exposed nerves. The last 3 blocks to my dealer's flat were the harshest. I had stopped frequently due to the severe contractions in my stomach up through my esophagus and the brutal cramping of all my limbs. A block from this place, I finally could not hold back any longer. I began to projectile vomit so hard that it took me to my knees, then flat out on the ground. Despite the fact that I had not eaten any food in 2 days, up came copious quantities of pure black liquid. I could not believe I had come so far and gotten so close just to come up short here, practically on the doorstep of the doctor. Scatman Crothers and Stanley Kubrick's film The Shining flashed through my brain. He'd flown all the way from Florida to Colorado, had taken a snowplow and driven in a blizzard all the way up to the Overlook Hotel to try and save the kid Danny, only to be axed as soon as he got through the door. I highly doubted any children's lives would be saved by my demise here, less than a block from the dealers. I spasmed like a jellyfish on my side upon the hard concrete sidewalk, puking uncontrollably, tears streaming from my eyes. Through the hazy blur of my saltwater-flooded corneas, I could see a group of giggling, uniformed school kids walking around me where I lay incapacitated on the ground. They pointed at me and whispered to each other, and then broke out into loud laughter as they passed by the pitiful scene of my public shame and sickness, displayed out before them in the crisp, cold morning air. "Okay, goddammit, get your fucking ass up off the ground," my mind screamed at me. What was I going to do? Just chill here, kicking on a street corner for 3 days and nights? I had to get up the stairs I could see clearly in the distance, the stairs to my only hope, my savior's pad. With every ounce of strength I had left in my cruelly ravaged body, not to get any out my already soaked through disgusting clothes. As I began climbing the staircase, I puked in the direction of a trash can, covering the top of it in black vomit. I continued painfully pulling myself up by the hand side, In a second, he was there, opening the door in his pajamas, obviously just awakened by my insistent knocking. The minute he looked at me, Juan Joseph knew what was happening. He put up his hand and in his thick Portuguese accent said, "1 second." He turned around, ran into his kitchen, and returned with the small trash container, which he handed to me to puke into. I said, "Toilet." Pulling me by my arm into his place, he shoved me through the bathroom door. I narrowly avoided destroying my only pair of pants, getting them down a half second before the powerful, unstoppable explosion of the same black liquid ejected like a shotgun blast out of my ass, as, at the same instant, I puked again into the bucket I held in my hand. When it was safe to get up for a moment, I went back out into the other room. He sat me down on a chair in his small kitchen dining area where he'd already started to cook up a shot for me. I continued puking and heaving into the can. Oh my God, I heard him muttering to himself in English, and then something else louder in his native tongue as he scurried around his kitchen, quickly preparing a dose for me. When finished, he turned to me and pantomimed the motion of sticking the syringe into his ass, a gesture that said it was no time to search for a vein, that I should just muscle the hit, something I already knew. I got the first hit into my ass cheek while he was cooking up a second, and then a third. I stabilized enough to search for a vein with the fourth. Sickness finally killed. I fell into a dark, dreamless sleep, sitting halfway up on a love seat in his living room. I woke at noon to the feeling of my Portuguese friend's little white dog licking my hand where it hung down to the ground. After buying a couple more grams and doing another shot for the road, I got ready to leave and catch the train to Bristol. I asked Juan Joseph if he was going to be around at the end of the month because my band was going to be on the Later with Jules Holland television program, and if he wanted to come, I could get him a seat in the audience. I was hoping my gesture might lead to me getting some free dope. He shook his head no and told me he was going to be in Portugal visiting family then. That was a drag because not only did it mean no gifted heroin, it meant when we came back to town, I would be back on the street just a few blocks down from where I was presently, forced to cop once again. After playing in Bristol the next day, we caught a flight to Germany on an off day while our guitar tech, the German television show, filmed in Essen. All I had for the 3 days we would be traveling was what I had left over from my unscheduled stop in London. It was less than a gram. I tried hard not to think about a replay of the running gun battle that had been Sheffield to London, only this time on German TV. I would have to ration myself almost down to nothing each of those days if I was going to make it. Hopefully there'd be a train station full of drug pushers in Essen. We arrived to a wintry scene of deep snow and ice. I was deflated when I saw that we were being driven to a hotel far outside the city. We checked into our rooms in the late afternoon. Upon getting inside, I prepared to cook up and do my last shot of the day, then realized if I were to do that, it would bring my meager stash down to around a half gram. Just a fucking half gram to get through 2 more days. I began to quietly freak out and prematurely grieve the upcoming avalanche of shit that was going to bury me, breaking out in a cold sweat in the process. A cold sweat that told me I was already beginning to withdraw, and we'd only just gotten there. I inquired at the front desk as to where the train station in Essen was. "It's 25 miles away, I'm afraid," was the depressing report I received. As I stood staring out the lobby window into the darkness, I could see that a massive snowstorm had kicked off. I couldn't afford to take a cab 25 miles and back while still having money to purchase drugs, so I decided to stay in my room and try to sleep. If that was not successful, I would stay awake all night, waiting as long as was humanly possible before allowing myself another shot. I turned on German TV and stared at the screen with the sound off. I thought about what was happening at home. Were Simon and Lane still keeping my meager business together? I lamented the fact that if I were only there, none of this self-inflicted torture would be happening. If I were home, I'd be selling crack and supporting my habit. And while Lane was staying with me, I'd more than likely be kept loaded due to his generosity. There had never been a time while I was in his company that he'd scored and not given me the same amount for free. But that was there and then. My present reality was far from that twisted, wistful fantasy land. As the clock revolved, I could not help but check it every few minutes, wishing like hell that the morning would come soon. I would turn and glance at the clock, and realizing only 10 minutes had gone by since my last look, my heightened anxiety increased. I had to force myself to not glance at it until an unsettling mania inevitably arose as I lay all night on the uncomfortable hotel bed, obsessing over the brutal reckoning coming my way. Finally, at 8 a.m., still awake and heading into deeper withdrawals, I could hold out no longer. I did my next shot, only to discover to my horror that it barely got me well. A half gram left. Late that afternoon, we would do sound and camera check for Rock Palace, a German concert show, then play an abbreviated set in front of a live audience that night, wait until the next day, then catch a flight with an afternoon arrival in Amsterdam, the city of our next engagement. I was never going to fucking make it. That much was abundantly clear. I was going to be into a full-on kick by tonight, and there was no way on earth I would be allowed to fly on any airline in the condition I'd be in by tomorrow. Before we were to leave the hotel to drive an hour to the venue where Rock Palace was filmed, and once more on the verge of withdrawals, I did another tiny shot to even worse results. I had reached the point of seriously diminished returns. Had my survival strategy been inherently flawed? Should I have just done a normal-sized shot, emptied my tiny cache of heroin into my veins, and thrown the fucking chips wildly into the unknown? It was too late, because now I only had the smallest amount of dope to get by on. Come what may, I had to get to Amsterdam tonight after the show. I asked at the front desk and discovered Amsterdam was only a 2-hour drive from Essen. I wouldn't have enough money for a train and dope, so my only chance was if the equipment van was rolling out tonight. I would ride with them.
All right, I'm going to go for now. We're at 27 minutes in chapter 40, so I'll remember that. All right. Have a good night, everyone. I'll be back later.